Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm so happy you're here. Today we're building the final piece in our cozy Halloween collection, the tall pantry cabinet. If you've already completed the hutch and the chest of drawers, this cabinet is the finishing touch that brings the entire collection together. It completes the little room we've been creating, and I hope you'll enjoy watching it slowly come to life as we build it together one piece at a time. Before we begin, let's take a quick look at the materials we'll be using today. For the best results, I recommend printing the templates on A4 cardstock between 160 and 200 GSM. In this tutorial, I'm using 160 GSM cardstock, which gives a nice balance between flexibility and strength. It's sturdy enough to hold the shape of the cabinet, while still being easy to fold and assemble. Along with your printed templates, you'll need a good pair of scissors, paper glue, and a scoring tool. If you don't have a dedicated scoring tool, don't worry. There are several simple alternatives that work just as well. You can use an empty ballpoint pen with no ink, the rounded end of a wooden skewer, a knitting needle with a smooth tip, an embossing stylus, or even the back of a butter knife, as long as it isn't sharp enough to cut the paper. The purpose of scoring is simply to create a gentle guide for the fold, allowing the cardstock to bend neatly without cracking the printed surface. A metal ruler is optional, but it makes long score lines much easier and more accurate, especially on larger panels. Tweezers are also optional, but they can be very helpful when positioning tiny details or reaching small areas where your fingers might get in the way. None of these extra tools are required, so use whatever you already have. Crafting should be enjoyable, and it's perfectly fine to work with simple supplies. Before we start assembling the cabinet, I'd like to share one small tip that can make a big difference once your project is finished. Because this is a tall piece of paper furniture, adding a little weight inside the bottom section will help keep it more stable when it's standing in your dollhouse. A small metal hex nut works very well, but you can also use a large washer, a few small coins, fishing weights, or any compact metal object that fits inside the hollow base. Once it's glued securely into place, the center of gravity sits lower, making the cabinet much less likely to tip over when you move your dollhouse or rearrange your miniature room. It's a simple addition, but one that makes the finished piece feel surprisingly solid. Now that everything is ready, let's begin building together. As we're folding, cutting, and gluing each piece into place, I'd like to share a story with you. Not really about miniature furniture, but about something many of us experience without even realizing it. A few years ago, a woman named Sophie attended a photography class. She wasn't planning to become a professional photographer. She simply thought it might be a relaxing hobby and a nice excuse to spend more time outdoors. On the first day, everyone in the class was asked to bring one favorite photograph they had taken. Some students arrived with breathtaking landscapes. Others had beautiful portraits filled with perfect lighting and incredible detail. When Sophie looked around the room, she quietly slipped her own photograph back into her bag. Compared to everyone else's work, it suddenly seemed ordinary. For the rest of the lesson, she couldn't stop comparing herself to the people sitting around her. Every time the instructor complimented someone else's work, she became a little more convinced that she simply wasn't talented enough. She stopped listening to the advice being shared because her attention was focused on one thought: everyone here is better than I am. At the end of the class, the instructor walked over to Sophie and asked if she had brought a photograph. She hesitated for a moment before handing him the picture she had almost hidden. It was nothing dramatic. There were no mountains, no sunsets, and no famous landmarks. It was simply a photograph of an elderly couple sitting on a wooden bench, holding hands while watching autumn leaves fall from the trees. The instructor looked at it for a long moment without saying anything. Finally, he smiled and asked, "Why didn't you show this to the class?" Sophie shrugged and replied, "Because it isn't as good as everyone else's." The instructor gently shook his head. "It isn't trying to be everyone else's. He explained that many people spend so much time comparing the quality of their work that they forget to ask a much more important question. Does it say something honest? Does it make someone feel something? Does it reflect the person who created it? He pointed to the photograph again and said, "Anyone can learn sharper focus or better lighting. Those are technical skills. But this picture made me stop and wonder who those two people are, what they've been through together, and what they might have been talking about in that quiet moment. That's something much harder to teach." Sophie had spent the entire afternoon judging herself against people who were on completely different journeys. Some had been taking photographs for 10 years. Others traveled constantly, searching for spectacular places to capture. She had been comparing the beginning of her own path with chapters she hadn't even reached yet. As she drove home that evening, she realized she had been doing the same thing in many parts of her life. Whenever she learned something new, she immediately looked for someone who knew more. Whenever she accomplished something, she found another person who had accomplished even more. It didn't matter how much progress she made, because there was always someone further ahead. For a long time, she believed this constant comparison was helping her improve. Instead, it quietly stole the joy she could have found in simply becoming a little better than she had been yesterday. Years passed before Sophie fully understood what her instructor had meant that day. She began noticing how often people measured themselves against someone else's life without ever realizing it. One friend believed she wasn't successful because someone from college had built a larger business. Another felt like a failure because social media was filled with families taking expensive vacations while she stayed home. Someone else quietly questioned whether they were creative enough simply because another artist had more followers, more experience, or more recognition. It seemed as though no matter what people achieved, their minds immediately searched for someone who had achieved a little more. One evening, while reading a book about psychology, Sophie came across a sentence that stayed with her for a very long time. It said that comparison can be useful when it inspires us to learn, but it becomes harmful when it convinces us that our own worth depends on always being one step ahead of someone else. She closed the book and thought about how many years she had spent chasing a finish line that didn't really exist. Every time she reached one goal, another appeared just beyond it. She had been living as though her life would finally begin after becoming smarter, more talented, more organized, more confident, or more accomplished. Yet every new achievement only moved the finish line farther away. That realization changed something inside her. She didn't stop learning, and she certainly didn't stop growing. Curiosity was still one of her favorite qualities. She simply stopped believing that she needed to earn the right to appreciate herself. There is a quiet but important difference between wanting to improve, because you enjoy learning, and believing that you are never enough until you become someone else. One mindset brings joy. The other quietly steals it. Not long afterward, Sophie returned to photography with a completely different perspective. She still admired the work of other photographers, but admiration no longer turned into self-criticism. Instead of asking herself, "Why can't I create something like that?" she began asking, "What do I enjoy creating?" It was such a small change in wording, yet it completely transformed the experience. She stopped trying to imitate someone else's vision and slowly discovered her own. I think the same idea applies to many creative hobbies, including miniature crafting. It's easy to look at someone else's finished project and notice every tiny detail they assembled perfectly. It's easy to think they must have more talent, steadier hands, or more experience. What we rarely see are all the evenings they spent learning, practicing, making small mistakes, and gradually becoming more confident. We usually compare our beginning to someone else's middle, or even the end of their journey. That comparison can never be fair because we're looking at completely different moments in two different stories. Perhaps that's why creative hobbies feel so refreshing. They gently remind us that creating isn't a competition. This little cabinet doesn't know how many followers you have. It doesn't know what your job is, how busy your week has been, or whether you consider yourself artistic. It simply waits for the next fold, the next drop of glue, and the next carefully placed piece. It asks only for your attention, not your perfection. Sometimes we forget that we are allowed to enjoy something simply because it brings us peace. Not everything we create has to become a business. Not every hobby has to become a side hustle. Not every skill has to be turned into another achievement to add to a resume. Some things are valuable simply because they make an ordinary afternoon feel a little warmer, a little calmer, and a little more meaningful. I think we all need more moments like that. As we continue assembling this cabinet, I hope you'll let yourself enjoy the process instead of thinking about whether every fold is absolutely perfect. The little worn paint, the cozy pumpkins, the tiny cottage illustration, and all the warm autumn details were designed to create a feeling, not to demand perfection. Just as old cottages become more charming through the marks left by time, handmade projects often become more meaningful because they carry small reminders that they were created by real hands, with patience and care. And maybe that's something worth remembering long after this project is finished. You don't have to become a different person before you're allowed to enjoy your creativity. You don't have to reach some imaginary level before you're worthy of feeling proud of what you've made. Growth is wonderful, and learning never truly ends, but neither of those things should prevent us from appreciating who we already are today. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can say to ourselves is, "I'm still learning, and that's perfectly okay. But I'm also enough exactly where I am." One of the reasons I love paper crafting is that it naturally encourages us to slow down. There aren't many activities today that ask us to focus on only one thing at a time. Most of our days are filled with notifications, conversations, responsibilities, and endless streams of information competing for our attention. Even when we decide to relax, we often find ourselves checking messages, scrolling through our phones, or thinking about everything that still needs to be done. Our minds rarely have the chance to rest. As you're working, remember that there's no need to rush. If one step takes a little longer than expected, that's perfectly fine. If you prefer to pause for a cup of tea or coffee and return later, that's perfectly fine too. Creative projects don't have deadlines. They wait patiently until we're ready to continue, and I think there's something comforting about that. If you discover that a fold isn't exactly where you wanted it, or a small piece doesn't line up perfectly on the first try, please don't be discouraged. Paper is a wonderfully forgiving material. One of the advantages of working with printable templates is that they stay with you. Whenever you want to build another cabinet, improve a small detail, or simply enjoy the project again, you can print another copy and start fresh. There's no pressure to make everything absolutely perfect the first time. When I design these templates, I spend a great deal of time testing every part before sharing them with you. My goal is always to make the assembly as clear, enjoyable, and straightforward as possible. And that's why I also create these step-by-step video tutorials. I want you to feel confident as you build. Even if this is your very first paper miniature, most people discover that once they've completed one project, the next one feels even easier because the techniques quickly become familiar. As you place the final shelves, attach the door, and watch the cabinet come together, take a moment to look at all three pieces in the collection. The hutch, the chest of drawers, and now this tall pantry cabinet each have their own purpose, but together they create a cozy little world filled with warm autumn colors, weathered painted wood, friendly pumpkins, tiny cottages, and the gentle spirit of a peaceful Halloween. I hope these miniatures bring a little warmth to your dollhouse and perhaps a little warmth to your own home as well. Thank you so much for joining me throughout this entire cozy Halloween collection. Whether you've built just this cabinet or completed all three projects, I truly appreciate you spending your creative time with me. Every template I design begins as a simple idea on my desk, and it's always wonderful to imagine those ideas finding new homes around the world, becoming part of your dollhouses, seasonal displays, dioramas, and miniature scenes. I hope these projects have given you more than just a few pieces of paper furniture. I hope they've offered you a chance to slow down for a little while, to enjoy creating with your own hands, and to remember that creativity doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Every careful fold, every tiny drop of glue, and every finished piece is something you created, and that's something worth celebrating. Thank you again for crafting with me. I wish you many peaceful evenings, plenty of inspiration for future projects, and countless happy hours building miniature worlds that make you smile. Take good care of yourself, enjoy every creative moment, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you again in the next collection. Happy crafting!